We're going to cover Chapter 5, Biological Aspects of Personality. It's a new approach to personality that differs greatly from those we've covered thus far. Today, we'll be taking a look at temperament, Eysenck's arousal and activation theory, and Gray's reinforcement sensitivity theory. I would venture to guess most of you have heard the term temperament before. What does it mean to you, and how would you define it? Temperament refers to your individual tendency toward reactivity. Are you generally a person who is calm and collected, or do you tend to be a bit more rigid and anxious? Do you carry inner tension or inner peace? We don't usually use the word temperament to describe adults' personalities, but we do refer to temperament when talking about infants. And researchers have found that temperament has a strong biological basis. The idea behind temperament is that physiological factors guide our responses to the environment. Temperament does not determine every behavior, but it helps us to determine average levels of behavior. There are three basic dimensions of infant temperament of which researchers have completely agreed on. We have activity, which is the motion or movement of the infant. So does the baby move around a lot? Are they busy? Emotionality describes the expressed emotion or affect that an infant has. Is the degree to which an infant expresses emotion. The third temperament dimension is sociability. This refers to the interpersonal interactions of the infant. This means calling out to others, making eye contact with others, and engaging with people. The fourth dimension of temperament, of which there is not entire consensus in the temperament research community, is aggression and impulsivity. This refers to the infant's proneness to be impulsive or aggressive. We talk about temperament and these dimensions of temperament because they can be considered the building blocks of personality. As we mature physically and mentally, temperament remains part of who we are, but many other factors become layered on top of temperament, like cognition, environment, and desires. As we get older, our temperament gets less visible. Let's turn our attention to Hans Eysenck. Born in 1916 in Berlin, Hans Eysenck was considered a hardcore empiricist. He left Germany in the pre-Nazi days and immigrated to England, where he spent most of his career. He saw the war coming and disagreed with what was going on in his country, so he left and is today primarily known as an English psychologist. Eysenck was among the first to explicitly link personality traits to physiological differences between people. We remember him today because of this pioneering theoretical beginnings. He represents a very different approach to personality that we've been studying so far. Freud, Jung, Adler, and Horney were using the clinical method and using their own introspective data to come up with their theories and contributions to the field of personality psychology. They drew data out of these experiences as well as case studies. They largely relied on that to understand personality. Eysenck didn't think this was good enough. He thought we need to rely on data from the laboratory. And he thought that if psychologists wanted to be taken seriously, then they needed to rely on empirical data. He was one of the early proponents of mapping genetic personality links. He was very influenced by Pavlov and his work with dogs and conditionability. He was fascinated that some dogs learned the associations between stimuli much faster than others. In other words, all dogs were not equal in terms of their conditionability. The dogs that were slower to learn were less physiologically prepared to do so than dogs that learned the association more quickly. This notion intrigued Eysenck. If there are differences in dogs' capacity to learn, then there must be differences amongst humans in this regard as well. Furthermore, Eysenck was very interested in a dimension of personality that was originally theorized by Carl Jung. This dimension is related to introversion and extroversion. Jung had made an observation that there was a basic dimension of personality, and he believed that in extroverts, the libido is directed to the external world. Thus, they're more sociable because their libido is directed outward, so they look much more active and outgoing. Introverts, on the other hand, direct their libido inwards. Eysenck was really drawn to this distinction. Not so much because he thought humans had a libido, but he was really drawn to the colorful description that Jung had given this personality dimension of introversion and extroversion. He was very interested in these basic behavioral differences, and he wondered, could it be that the introvert and extrovert difference could explain the different learning behavior in dogs? so he sought to find out. His descriptive personality theory was published in 1947, in which he goes into this theory in more depth. In the early 1940s, Eysenck was working in the British military. He approached the leaders in the military and essentially asked if he could study what made good leaders in the military and the differing personality characteristics. He was told no, but he went ahead and did so anyway. He had a bit of a reputation of being defiant. So he began his research, and he started off with the basic question of, are the people who are in charge in the military showing better personality characteristics than those they're leading? This question is probably part of the reason that his superiors didn't want him to do this. He observed in his research that there appeared to be 4 super factors of personality. They were extroversion and neuroticism, psychoticism, which refers to low conscientiousness and less agreeableness and not pertaining to the present-day definition of psychosis, and intelligence. The first 2 factors, extroversion and neuroticism, he linked to the nervous system, and this fed to his theory on arousal activation, which we'll get into now. Whereas many people were describing personality as a product of psychodynamics, Eysenck was arguing for a biological basis. In his theory, Eysenck argued that the dimensions of temperament are related to cortical arousal in the brain. He thought that they came from the brain and were specifically mediated by the ascending reticular activating system. The ascending reticular activating system is a part of the brain that mediates sleep and arousal. Eysenck argued that extroverts have lower levels of cortical arousal in this area, and introverts have a higher level of arousal in the same area. Therefore, introverts are stimulus shy, and extroverts are stimulus hungry. This was the earliest version of what Eysenck proposed, and his ideas changed over time. But this was a landmark finding, that you can actually measure the cortex and make determinations about a person's personality and their levels of sociability and activity.